So Wherefore Art the Begats is my attempt at King James-ish English. For those of you who don't understand what that means, I have a translation for you. It's why do the genealogies exist? What we're going to do is we're going to, yes, on a Saturday night, we're going to look at probably the driest possible subject from the book that you could imagine. And so I have my work cut out for me. And since this is a church for all people, I know that we have some younger people here who love to text. And so I have a slide for you as well. I tried to translate it for you. I ran this by my mom, and she said that it's inaccurate because LOL is spelled correctly, but we'll just leave that as we may. We'll just leave that alone. So before we actually get into the serious meat of the matter, I want to lay a few ground rules. We have a few presuppositions we want to establish here to make sure that we're staying within the guardrails, because if you don't have rules, then you don't know if you're veering off into strange territory that you shouldn't be going in. We want to handle the word of truth correctly. We want to rightly divide the word of truth, as the Bible puts it. So the first rule is that the Bible is the inspired word of God and is without error in the original manuscripts. This really shouldn't require any commentary. I'm sure you all believe this. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be in this church. The second one is that every jot and tittle has a purpose. There are no accidents in Scripture. If it's there in the book, it's there for a reason. No accidents. So even if we don't understand what that purpose is, that doesn't mean there isn't a purpose. It just means that we need to dig a little deeper and figure out what that purpose is. The third rule is exegete, don't eisegete. Okay, great. Now we got the big words. Take a look around the room and notice the doors. Don't walk through them just yet. You notice there's a red sign above that door, and that door. What does it say? Exit. Exit means what? Leave, to get out of it, right? The prefix ex means to get out of. So when we exegete the text, what we do is we get out of the text that which the text says. We're reading it for what it says. The opposite of that is called eisegeting or eisegesis. And the way my Sunday school teacher from when I first came to Antioch, this guy by the name of James Hansen, was teaching a class on hermeneutics, I believe. And he says, eisegesis, you can remember this because people go around saying, I see Jesus here, I see Jesus underneath this potted plant. No, you don't see Jesus, right? What you do is when you eisegete, you take your ideas from your brain, you put them into the text, and you say, this is what it means to me. No, we want to find out what the text means and then find out how we fit into it, not the other way around. So exegete, don't eisegete. And to put it into a very, very tiny nutshell, a guy I once knew said the best commentary on the Bible is the Bible. And if you want to know what it says, the best thing to do is to read it. Oh, you know him too. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at some genealogies in the Bible, and we're going to start at the back of the Bible and work our way forward. We're going to pretend we're reading Hebrew. So we're going to start at Luke 3, Matthew 1, then 1 Chronicles 1 through 9, Genesis 10, and then I'm going to combine the genealogies in Genesis 5 and Genesis 11 into one. And when I get done with it, you're going to say, wow, that was a brilliant move, if I've done my job correctly. All right, so let's take a look at Luke chapter 3, and I'll start reading in verse 23. I'll be reading from the New American Standard because that's where all my notes are scribbled. It says, when he began his ministry, Jesus himself was about 30 years of age, being, as was supposed, the son of Joseph, the son of Eli, the son of Mattat, the son of Levi, the son of Melchi, the son of Jedi, the son of Joseph. Don't try this at home, folks. I am a trained professional. If you jump down to verse 38, that says, the son of Enoch, the son of Seth, the son of Adam, the son of God. So now, I'm going to ask you a question over and over again. The question is, wherefore art this begat? What? Why is this genealogy here? So we look at this, and we see some patterns. The pattern we see repeated over and over again in Luke's genealogy is the son of B, the son of C, the son of D, the son of E. See, I spent 22 years as a software developer. So what I do is I'm trained to look for patterns and to extrapolate information from those patterns and make code to express them. So we see this pattern, the son of B, the son of D, the son of E, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what is Luke trying to communicate to us here? Every writer has a purpose. What is Luke's purpose for writing this genealogy? Well, he gives you a little hint when you come down here and it says, the son of Adam. So what is the purpose of this genealogy? What is Luke trying to tell us about Jesus? This is where you talk to me. He's a son of Adam. He came from Adam. He's the son of Adam, which makes him he's fully man. He is human. So when you look at Luke's his genealogy, but then also the book as a whole, we see Jesus, a picture of Jesus painted as the perfect man. Jesus is the perfect man. Okay, let's take a look over. We take a couple hops over to the left, and we look at Matthew chapter 1. If you're not having fun yet, you will soon. All right, here we go. Matthew chapter 1, starting in verse 1. The record of the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob was the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Perez was the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Ram. And we got a bunch of funny names. Jump down to verse 16. It says, Jacob was the father of Joseph, heard of those guys, the husband of Mary, by whom Jesus was born, who is called Messiah. So you can see Matthew takes the genealogy and he kind of turns it on his head, doesn't he? So who does Matthew start with? He starts with Abraham. Well, this is interesting, but first we got to back up. Let's see what patterns are we seeing here. A was the father of B, B was the father of C, and D was the father of E. This is just to satisfy my OCD. I'm sorry, you have to bear with me. So when we look at this, we say, okay, now what is the purpose? What is Matthew trying to tell us about Jesus? He starts with Abraham, which makes Jesus the son of the promise. Remember, God made Abraham a promise. Through you, all nations will be blessed. But what I didn't read is there are a whole bunch of guys right in the middle of this genealogy. Let me read off some of their names. David, Solomon, Rehoboam, Abijah, Asa, Joram, Uzziah, Ahaz, Hezekiah. You recognize these guys? What are they? They're kings. So interesting. What Matthew is doing here is he's showing you this Jesus is the Messiah. Well, Messiah, what does that mean? Well, that means he's the anointed one. Jesus is the rightful heir to the throne of Israel. He is the promised Messiah king. So that when you look through Matthew's entire genealogy, his book is primarily written to the Jews to demonstrate that Jesus is the promised Messiah. Okay? So he's Jewish because he's descended from Abraham, and he is the rightful heir to the throne of Israel because he is of the line of David. Next genealogy, 1 Chronicles 1 through 9. Here's where things start getting a little bit weird, because we go to the book of 1 Chronicles, and if you've ever done your devotional reading out of the book of 1 Chronicles, you'll know that it's not exactly a very exciting read for the first 9 chapters. Here's how it starts. Adam, Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, Noah, Shem, Ham, Japheth, period. Hello, I'd like to buy a verb. This is not even a sentence. What is this? It's just a laundry list of names. As we go along a little bit further, we see things like the sons of Gomer were Ashkenaz, Diphthah, and Togarmah, and then we got a whole bunch of funny names. We see Cush became the father of Nimrod, and he began to be a mighty one in the earth. So we got a few different patterns going on here, and it goes on for 9 whole chapters of funny names upon funny names upon funny names. So what patterns do we see? We see A, B, C, D, as we did there in verse 1. We also see the sons of A were B, C, and D. And then we also see A became the father of B. So what is the purpose of this entire gigantic genealogy? Well, when you start to scratch the surface, you start to see interesting things come out. Like in verse 10, it says, Cush became the father of Nimrod. Well, wait a minute. Cush. I've heard of that before. What's Cush? Cush is modern-day Sudan. Did you know that? In verse 11, it says, Mizraim became the father of the people of Lud, Anam, Lehab, and Naphtoph. Mizraim. Did you know that there's a country in the Middle East whose inhabitants today refer to their own country as Mizr, or Mizer, M-I-Z-R? That country is Egypt. So when you see Mizraim in the Bible, replace it with Egypt, because that's what you're talking about. Canaan, everybody knows Canaan because you've been to Sunday school. You know, that's the promised land, right? Aram, in verse 17, that's Syria, or Aleppo. Elam, also in verse 17, that's the western region, western coast of Iran, where the Bushehr nuclear plant is. So when you start scratching beneath the surface and you start looking up, like, who are these people? It's like, wow, you start seeing, wow, there are a bunch of nations in here. There are a whole bunch of people. And so when we trace it, and we trace all these people back to one person, back to Adam. So what we have here in 1 Chronicles 1 through 9, I like to say this is the genealogy of all mankind. You want to know where these people came from? Go to 1 Chronicles 1 through 9. Chances are you'll find them in there somewhere. Genesis chapter 10 is what is another kind of a parallel genealogy to 1 Chronicles 1 through 9. For those people who like to give special labels to sections of Scripture, they call this the Table of Nations. So what do we see when we get to Genesis chapter 10? Now these are the records of the generations of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the sons of Noah, and the sons were born to them after the flood. Verse 6, the sons of Ham were Cush, and Mizraim, and Put, and Canaan. Right? These are names we just talked about. The sons of Cush were Sheba, and Havilah, and Sabta, and Ramah, and Sabteka, and all these other guys. This is called the Table of Nations. So we see the sons of A were B, C, and D. A became the father of B, the Table of Nations. So you want to know where everybody comes from? Go to Genesis chapter 10, 1 Chronicles 1 through 9, and you'll find them. Everything has a purpose. Now here's where we start getting, have a little bit more fun. Genesis chapter 5. I hope I'm not going to be the only one having fun here, because otherwise it's going to be very lonely for me. All right, Genesis chapter 5, starting in verse 3. When Adam had lived 130 years, he became the father of a son in his own likeness, according to his image, and named him Seth. Then the days of Adam, after he became the father of Seth, were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. Seth lived 105 years and became the father of Enoch, and then Seth lived 807 years after he became the father of Enoch, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. And it goes on like this, and on, and on, and on. So the pattern is really, really easy to see. What we see here in Genesis chapter 5 is A lived X years and begat B. Okay? And then we see A lived after he begat B Y years and begat sons and daughters. And finally, and all the days of A were X plus Y years, and he died. Can you tell I'm a software developer? I like to put variables in places where names go, and then you just replace the variable with the name of the person. Okay? So that's how Genesis 5 goes. Switch over to Genesis chapter 11. Genesis chapter 11, starting in verse 10. These are the records of the generations of Shem. Shem was 100 years old and became the father of Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. And Shem lived 500 years after he became the father of Arphaxad. And he had other sons and daughters. Arphaxad lived 35 years and became the father of Shelah. And Arphaxad lived 403 years, after he became the father of Shelah. And he had other sons and daughters. Shelah lived 30 years and became the father of Eber. Shelah lived 403 years after he became the father of Eber, and he had other sons and daughters. All right, so what's the pattern we see here? A lived X years and he begat B. This seems familiar. And then A lived after he begat B Y years and he begat sons and daughters. And all the days were A were X plus Y years and he died, right? No. Some of you caught it. Some of you didn't. You got to pay attention. There are no Andidides. Genesis 5 has Andidides all over the place. Genesis chapter 11 doesn't have any Andidides. Why are there no Andidides in Genesis chapter 11? Well, look back at Genesis chapter 5 again. You see, I didn't tell the whole truth when I said this is the pattern that goes throughout Genesis chapter 5. Because there's one guy who breaks the pattern. Verse 21. Enoch lived 65 years and became the father of Methuselah. Enoch walked with God 300 years after he became the father of Methuselah, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Now ask yourself a question. Why do you suppose God would say, have Moses write, and he died, and he died, and he died, and he died, and he died? It's pretty clear that he died, because they're not walking around today. And in Genesis chapter 11, he didn't bother doing the Andy died thing. Nobody Andy died. So what's going on here? In Genesis chapter 5, it's almost like God takes a flashlight or a spotlight and he goes, click. Hey, see this guy Enoch? Pay attention. This guy, there's something different about this guy. I want you to pay attention. Right? See, there is no Andy died. This guy was special, and we'll talk a little bit more about him as we go along. But before we do that, when I was a kid, I used to watch a lot of Sesame Street. And there's a song that's stuck in my head that goes a little bit like, one of these things is not like the others. Which one is it? Do you know? which one of these genealogies is different than all the others? Well, Genesis 5 and Genesis chapter 11 are very, very different from all the others. Remember, we're treating Genesis 5 and 11 as one genealogy. You see, little things make a big difference. Genesis 5 and Genesis chapter 11 are the only genealogies in the entire Bible that tell you how old each dude was when he had his son. They're the only ones, the only genealogies in the entire Bible that have numbers. Interesting. So what do we do with this? Well, first of all, remember, every jot and tittle has a purpose. It's not an accident that they're there. So what do we do with this? Well, let's go back to Genesis chapter 5, and let's see what becomes of all these numbers. So we know that when Adam was 130 years, he had a son named Seth. When Seth, I'll try to squat down here a little bit so you guys can see. When Seth was 105 years old, he had Enoch. When Enoch was 90 years old, he had Kenan. When Kenan was 70 years old, he had Mahalalel. When Mahalalel was 65 years old, he had Jared. When Jared was 162, he had Enoch. And then when Enoch was 65, he had Methuselah. And then when Methuselah was 187 years old, he had Lamech. When Lamech was 182, he had Noah. And then Noah, when he got to be a ripe old age of 500, started having kids. Or at least those are the ones that are recorded for us. When you add all these up, you get what? No mental math, people? 1,556 years. You ever see the M+ button on a calculator? You know what that's for? It's memory plus. See, you can learn something useful in church today. Okay? You never know with me what you're going to learn. You just learned that M+ means add it to memory. So do that in your brain, M+. Stick that number in your memory. We're going to need it in a couple minutes. When we go to Genesis chapter 11, we see a different set of names. We see Shem was 100 when he had Arphaxad. Arphaxad was, give me a break. Are you kidding me? 35 years old and he's having kids? This is like babies having babies. Noah was 500. Arphaxad comes around, 35, I'm ready. It's crazy. Shelah was 30 years old. Oh, what are these kids coming to? Eber was 34. Peleg was 30. Oh, scandalous. Reu was 32. Serug was 30. Nahor. We don't talk about Nahor. He brought shame upon the family by having kids when he was 29. Terah was 130. Smart man. Abram, well, we're tracing our genealogy down to Abram, so we don't care about his age at this point. So when you add all of this up, what you get is 450 years. And plus. Now, oh yeah, mental math. Math is hard, right? That's okay, we're going to make it easy for you. After the gratuitous animation ceases, we'll see that from Adam to Seth is 1,556 years. And then from Seth to Abram is 450 years. When you add those together, you get 2,006 years. But math is hard. It's Saturday night. We'll call it even at 2,000. So you have roughly 2,000 years from Adam to Abram. Well, Abram lived around 2000 BC, late 1900s, early 2000s. This is a pretty well-established fact by both secular and biblical scholars, so there's no contest here. So back about 2000 BC, that puts Abraham about 2,000 years away from Jesus. Everybody tracking with me? You picking up what I'm putting down? Good. All right. So we live in the year what? Very good. That puts us roughly how many years away from Jesus? Roughly 2,000, because math is hard. We'll just keep the numbers nice and even. So when you take 2,000 plus 2,000 plus 2,000, you get? Amen. About 4,000. We've got to talk later. We get about 6,000 years. Now, the $64,000 question is, can you determine the age of the earth by looking at the genealogies? If I'm asking, it's probably a trick question. You cannot. Right? Because the genealogies only go back as far as whom? Adam. Right? If you want to know how old the earth is, you have to go back a few more chapters, don't you? So, assuming if you've never read Genesis 1 through Genesis 5, then you would not be able to tell how old the earth is, right? So, can you use the genealogies to tell how old the earth is? No. Strictly speaking, no, you cannot. You have to import other knowledge from other chapters and other books into that to put it all together, right? So what you can answer is the question, how long has man been on the earth? And the answer is approximately 6,000 years. But alas, there are naysayers. And the naysayers, they do the nay-nay. The naysayers do the nay-nay, because the naysayers say, well, Dan, you know, this sounds like a great story and everything, but you can't do this. You're supposed to have advanced. Uh-oh. Oh, no, did it die? Okay, try again. I think my big fat thumb just slid the off switch off. Hey, naysayers do the nay-nay. All right, so what the naysayers say is that father and son can actually mean ancestor and descendant. So every time you see father of or son of, it does not necessarily mean daddy or, you know, daddy's boy. And here's some examples of that. In Luke 18:38, blind Bartimaeus cries out, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. Now wait a minute. Did blind Bartimaeus really think that Jesus' daddy was David, King David? No, he didn't think that. Like, he's blind Bartimaeus, not dumb Bartimaeus. So blind Bartimaeus says, Jesus, son of David. He recognized that Jesus is a descendant of David. He's the rightful heir to the throne. Abraham was called the father of Jacob in Genesis 28:13. But alas, there's a generation missing there, isn't there? It's Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. So Jacob is actually the grandson of Abraham, not the son, making, of course, Abraham the grandfather of Jacob. Laban is called the son of Nahor in Genesis 29:5, but that's not what he was, not the way we render the word. We would render the word, we would say Laban is the grandson of Nahor. Okay? So the naysayers are absolutely correct. Father and son can mean ancestor and descendant, respectively. But, as I like to say, can does not mean always. So how do you know when it does and when it doesn't? Context. The naysayers continue. They say biblical genealogies are routinely telescoped. They purposely omit names. Therefore, genealogies cannot be used as chronologies. Okay, do we know the difference between a genealogy and a chronology? Genealogy comes from two Greek words, geneia and logos. Oh, great, now he's speaking Greek. He's so smart. Geneia means descent, and logos is the study of. So it's the study of descent. Chronology comes from chronos. You know, if you have a watch, Casio watch might say chronograph on it, right? That comes from the Greek word chronos, which means time, and plus you have logos, the study of. So, in a nutshell, a genealogy is counting heads, but a chronology is counting time. So we clear? Okay. So what they say is you cannot use a head count as a clock, is basically what the naysayers say. So I said, okay, let's see what they're talking about. But I have to warn you, you need to mind the gap. There are indeed gaps in the genealogies throughout the Bible. For example, when we go to 1 Chronicles 3, 11 and 12, we see these names in this order. Jehoram, Ahaziah, Joash, Amaziah, and Azariah, or as his friends called him, Uzziah, or Uzi. When we get over to Matthew chapter 1, however, we see weird things happening. We see Jehoram, but we don't see Ahaziah, we don't see Joash, and we don't see Amaziah, but we do see Uzi. What's going on here? Well, remember, wherefore art the begat in Matthew? What's the purpose of Matthew's genealogy? It's to prove that Jesus is what? The king. So if you're going to prove kingly lineage, do you have to list off every single name in the lineage? No, you don't. Think of this as like a game of connect the dots. And if you get a page of connect the dots, you've got a bunch of dots with numbers next to them, and as long as you know how to count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you can string the numbers together, and you can get a picture that emerges. Think of it as low-res graphics resolution, genealogies. Kind of like Apple II kind of graphics. Almost Pong level. The young kids are like, what? Ask your parents when you go home, they'll explain it to you. All right. But sometimes there are huge gaps. I mean, you thought three generations was bad. Check this one out. 1 Chronicles 6, 9 through 11. Zeraiah, Marioth, Amariah, Ahitub, Zadok. And then we get over to Ezra chapter 7, verses 3 and 4, and we see Ezra, I don't know if he fell asleep at the pen or what happened, but we see Zeraiah, Marioth, okay, good. Bueller, no. Hey, Azariah, good to see you. Azariah shows up, and then there's Amariah. 6 whole generations are missing in this genealogy. Well, you see, the genealogies have intentionally been telescoped. So therefore, you can't trust any of the genealogies, right? Well, no. Let's take a look at this genealogy really quickly. Ezra chapter 7, wherefore art this genealogy? What is the purpose of Ezra listing off these names? Well, in Ezra chapter 7, verse 1, it says, now after these things in the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, there went up Ezra, son of Seraiah, the son of Azariah, the son of Hilkiah. Funny names. Jump down to verse 5. The son of Abishua, the son of Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the chief priest. We have a clue. If I were to take you over to Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 9, you would see Nehemiah describe Ezra as a priest and a scribe. What was the qualification? What was the number one thing that had to be true about an individual if he were going to be a priest? He had to be a descendant of Aaron. So what's Ezra doing here? He's giving you his credentials. Yes, I'm a priest and a scribe. Here's why I can call myself a priest and a scribe. Here's a quick rundown of my genealogy. Boom, 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 Aaron. Mic drop, right? Ezra does the mic drop, and then he goes on to do what he needs to do. So when we look at this genealogy, we say, okay, this is like super low-res graphics. Now, this is the Pong genealogy, right? You got a block and you got another block, and it's just really, really crude, but it gets the point across. He connects the dots from him all the way back to Aaron. Yes, he can be a priest. So, how do we know when there's a gap? The only way we can know that there is a gap is when we can read between the lines in one verse as if we see it on the lines in another verse. Did you notice how I exposed the gaps here? I went to one passage, and if you took the passage in isolation, Matthew 1:8, for example, and you looked at it, you're like, okay, yeah, fine, it's a genealogy. But unless you cross-reference back to 1 Chronicles, you'd never know that gap was there. So if we're going to exegete the text and not eisegete the text, we're going to take out of rather than read into, we have to connect Scripture with Scripture. And when we do that, we see things come together. Rule number 3, exegete, don't eisegete. So what do we see in Genesis chapter 5? Are there any gaps possible in Genesis chapter 5? Well, if we turn back to Genesis 4, verse 25, we see something interesting. Adam had relations with his wife again, exegete, don't eisegete, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth. Is there any doubt who Seth's daddy is? There's only one man on the planet. There better not be any doubt. Is there any doubt who his mama is? Who named Seth? Eve named Seth, right? In general, who names the kids? In Hebrew culture, who names the kids? Does mom-in-law get to name the kids? I don't think so. Right? So the parents name the kids. So we see here that Adam had relations with his wife, and then she gave birth to a son, and then she named him Seth. That's a triple whammy right there. There's no gap possible between Adam and Seth. That's airtight. Go to the next verse, Genesis 4, verse 26. To Seth, to him also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. Okay, so to whom? Well, to Seth, to him. It's a little redundant, don't you think? To Seth, to him. You think maybe God's trying to tell us something? No, it wasn't to Adam. It wasn't to somebody else. It was to Seth. So is it possible? And also, Seth gave his son his name. Parents named their kids. So there's no gap possible between Seth and Enosh. When we jump over to Genesis 5, verse 29, we see there's no gap possible there either because it says here that Lamech called his name Noah. Lamech called his son Noah. The parents named the kids. No gap possible there. Here's where things start getting really fun. Jude 14. Jude, second to last book of the Bible. Are you turning there or are you swiping? Or are you just watching me sweat? It was also about these men that Enoch, in the 7th generation from Adam, prophesied, saying, and there's his prophecy. So let's do a little counting, shall we? Inclusive of Adam, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Are you seeing what I'm seeing? Do you see any possibility of missing generations between any of these guys here? Well, not unless Jude got it wrong, right? So I would say that there is no possibility of a gap between Adam and Enoch. Jude 14 seals that up rather nicely for us. But that does leave us with a little bit of a hole here between Enoch and Methuselah and Lamech, because we don't have any verses to kind of do this overlay and figure out and just say, yep, without a doubt, there are no gaps there. But let's take a look at the people involved. Enoch was a prophet. And his name means dedicated. He was so dedicated that when he was 365 years old, God took him. Didn't allow him to experience death because he had a plan for him. He comes back in Revelation chapter 11, by the way. He's one of 2 men who never died. The other guy is Elijah. Elijah didn't die. 2 witnesses in Revelation chapter 11. I read the end of the book. It's really good. He's coming back with Elijah. So remember, Enoch was a prophet. This is very, very important. His son's name was Methuselah. And his name means, when he is dead, it shall be sent. Wow, what an interesting thing to name your child. Now, you see that it says in parentheses there, it's disputed. Not everybody agrees that his name, Methuselah's name, means when he is dead, it is sent. Some people believe that it means it's more likely to mean something along the lines of man of the spear or some variant thereof. But I don't think that really fits too well. And so we're just gonna go with me on this one, and we'll ride this horse and see where it takes us. When he is dead, it shall be sent. And he lived longer than anyone in recorded history. Now this is really interesting. Remember, Methuselah's dad is Enoch. Enoch was a prophet. And you know what? I don't think you'd want to be a prophet, because prophets had to do some weird stuff. Take Hosea, for example. Hosea has a kid. God says, name him Jezreel, which means God will sow. Why? God says to him, call him Jezreel, because I will soon punish the house of Jehu for the massacre at Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of Israel. Wow. Hey, why'd your dad name you Jezreel? Well, let me tell you the story. Because we messed up back then. And then, Hosea's wife started stepping out on him. And then she had, I think it was a girl. Lo Ruhamah, which means no compassion. Or, as the NIV renders it, not loved. Who names their daughter not loved? Come here, sweetheart. You're not loved. I love you, not loved. Like, what is this? What kind of psychological damage are you setting this child up for? And then Mrs. Hosea steps out again, has another kid named, and God says, name that child Lo Ami, which means not my people. How appropriate. You step out, I'm going to give your kid a funny name. Well, why did God, Lo Ami, not my people, why did your dad name you that? Well, I'll tell you why, because Israel's in a state of rebellion against God. He says, I will no longer have compassion on you. That's why he named my brother Lo Ruhamah. And I'm Lo Ami, not my people, because my mom was, she doing the wrong thing. And Israel as a whole has stepped out on God and done the wrong thing. Oh, object lessons. Use your kids as an object lesson. I wouldn't recommend you doing this today. You probably have, some government agency showing up on your doorstep. How about Isaiah? Isaiah has a son. Names him, oh boy, here we go, Maher Shalal Hashbaz, which means hurry to the spoils. Isaiah 8, 3 and 4 says, then the Lord said to me, name him Maher Shalal Hashbaz. Again, don't try this at home. I am a trained professional. For before the boy knows how to cry out, my father or my mother, the wealth of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria will be carried away before the king of Assyria. So remember that when the Hebrews named their kids, they named them for a reason. It wasn't just like, oh, Daniel Lee. Mom, why'd you name me Daniel Lee? Oh, because it just kind of rolled off the tongue. Like, thanks, Mom, so does sushi. Blah! No, they really put some thought into the names they named their kids. And if you were a prophet and God says, name your kid this, he had a very specific reason for doing so. Every jot and tittle is there for a reason. Now, let's take this all together and stitch it into a story. Enoch was a prophet. His name means dedicated. He was so dedicated that when he was 365 years old, God did not allow him to experience death. He took him directly to heaven. When he was 65 years old, however, he had a son named Methuselah. Methuselah, whose name means after he is dead, it shall be sent, lived longer than anybody in recorded history. When he was 187 years old, he had a son named Lamech. Lamech lived to be 777 years old, which incidentally meant that he died 5 years before his dad did. When he was 182 years old, however, he had a son named Noah. And when Noah was 600 years old, something very interesting happened. Anybody know what happened? The flood. The flood started. Now watch this. Ladies and gentlemen, you do not know how many hours I put into making this slide. I had the calculator out. I calculated it down to the pixel. There's not an accident that that red line that says flood goes right through Methuselah, straight down into Noah. Because here's what I think happened. Now, this is where I'm reading into the text a little bit. So I'm not going to die on this hill, but this is the reason why I think Methuselah's name means after he's dead, it shall be sent. What happened when Noah and his family, right before the flood started, what did God tell them to do? After they got it all loaded up, he says, all right, get thee on the ark. Okay, so they get on the ark, and then what'd they do? They sat in a zoo in a box for 7 whole days. As Pastor Hutch used to say, you know the only thing that smells worse than a sheep? 2 sheep. And he had at least 7 of them on there. I don't know if it was 7 pairs or 7 sheep, but there was stank in there. And God had them sit for 7 whole days before the water started. What's going on there? Well, we know that Methuselah wasn't on the ark, so here's what I think happened. Again, you can take it or leave it, whatever. I think what happened was Methuselah died about a week before the flood started. And I think God, in his mercy and his grace, gave Noah and his family a chance to mourn the loss of their grandfather before all water broke loose. After he is dead, it shall be sent. I don't think it's a coincidence. So what's my verdict on Genesis chapter 5? From what I can tell, there are no gaps. There are no gaps in chronology, counting time, and no gaps in genealogy, counting heads. What about Genesis chapter 11? Genesis chapter 11 doesn't have a whole lot of verses that are really, really super airtight. What we do have is an overlay of a bunch of different scriptures that we can use to seal the gaps. So, for example, in Genesis chapter 10, what we see are these names listed in this order: Shem, Arphaxad, Shelah, Eber, and Peleg. When we look at Genesis chapter 10, we see those names in that order, but we don't see anywhere else in Scripture where these names are listed and names are either added or removed. Are you following me? Yeah. Okay, so we see those names listed. Excuse me. And then when we go over to 1 Chronicles 1, 24 through 27, this is what we see. We see Shem, Arphaxad, Shelah, Eber, Peleg, Reu, Serug, Nahor, Terah, and Abram. Listed in that order, no names added, no names missing. Exegete, don't eisegete, let Scripture speak to you. But then, well, we go over to Luke, and things start getting a little weird for us. We see all these names, but then we have, you notice I have a white spot there with a dotted line. I had to do that because I had to make room for our little friend here. You know who this is? That's the elephant in the room, folks. The elephant in the room, Luke 3:36. Why do I call Luke 3:36 the elephant in the room? Well, I'll tell you. When we look at Luke 3:36, here's what we see. We see these names listed in this order: Shem, Arphaxad, Canaan, Shelah, and Heber. But when we go over to 1 Chronicles 1, 17 and 18 and Genesis chapter 11, here's what we see. We see Shem, we see Arphaxad, but we do not see Canaan. We do see Shelah and Heber, though. So this is why we call it the elephant in the room. So what's going on here? I like to ask questions. I'm always asking why. What's the purpose here? What's going on here? It doesn't seem to fit. So there are a couple of explanations that have been raised to try to explain this away. The first explanation is that Shelah and Canaan are brothers. But we reject this out of hand because there's no example anywhere in the Bible where a genealogy says somebody begat somebody and what they're actually talking about is brothers. That's kind of weird. You can't give birth to your own brother. You can't go there. So you exegete, don't eisegete. Don't take an idea and read it into the text. The other idea is that it's a copyist mistake. Remember what we said early on, the Bible is inerrant in its original manuscripts. But the people who copied the manuscripts weren't inerrant. So this gives rise to the whole discipline and science of textual criticism. Things get really, really complicated, but I'm going to help boil it down for you. So, but Dr. Geisler, God rest his soul, he passed away on July 1st of this year. Dr. Geisler disagrees with me, or disagreed with me. I think he agrees now. But he says the attempt to explain away Luke 3:36, Luke 3:36 as no gap seems highly implausible. There is no real manuscript authority for omitting Canaan from Luke 3:36. That sequence is in all major and virtually all minor manuscripts. So I've written a book, and I'm very careful. I try to be preemptive about the things that I state. If I think I'm going to be challenged, if I think it's even questionable, I footnote it. But the interesting thing about this is that in the Baker Encyclopedia of Apologetics, from which I got this quote, there's no footnote. So I'm like, okay, Dr. Geisler, you're a smart guy, but why didn't you footnote this to give me something to go on? So I started doing some digging around. So I said, where's Canaan? I want to know where Canaan is. Where is this guy? Well, normally I go through and I attach dates and I give a little bit of commentary about each one of these manuscripts, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to blaze through them because it's also getting a little bit late. People are getting sleepy, and I don't want to bore you with a whole bunch of technical mumbo-jumbo. But what I can tell you, in the short amount of time we have, is that Canaan is not in the Samaritan Pentateuch. He is not in any of the writings of Josephus. He's not in the Targum Onkelos. He is not in the writings of Theophilus of Antioch. He is not in Julius Africanus. He is not to be found in Seder Olam Rabbah. He is not in P75. This is the Bodmer Papyrus. This is the oldest extant copy of the book of Luke that we have. Canaan, son of Arphaxad, ain't there. Okay, what else? He's not in Codex Vaticanus. And he's not in the Jerome's Latin Vulgate. Furthermore, he is also not in the Targum Pseudo-Jonathan. He's not in the Codex Beze. He is not in the Hebrew Masoretic text. This is the big one. The Old Testament was originally written in what? Hebrew. In the original language text that we have, the oldest text that we have, Canaan, son of Arphaxad, is nowhere to be found. He ain't there. So in a nutshell, he's not in any manuscript before the 4th century AD. Let that sink in for a second. 4th century AD, up until that point, no Canaan, son of Arphaxad. After that point, we start saying, okay, no, really, where's Canaan? Because you don't just make up a name out of whole cloth and say, well, there he is. So where is he? Well, he is in most accounts in the Septuagint. He is in the Codex Vaticanus. Now, the Codex Vaticanus is one of the documents of the Septuagint. He is in the Codex Alexandrinus, and he is in Augustine's City of God. In a nutshell, he is in manuscripts after the 4th century AD. But alas, what do I know? I'm not a Hebrew scholar, but this guy is. Andrew E. Steinman is a distinguished professor of theology and Hebrew at Concordia University, Chicago, says, before the 4th century AD Codex Vaticanus, there is no evidence conclusively pointing to the inclusion of Canaan as a son of Arphaxad and father of Shelah. And if you have one of those newfangled smartphone things, you can scan that little QR code right there, and it'll take you right to the article from which I got this quote. Okay, now that we're done geeking out on all the manuscript evidence, I think there's probably one person in here who understood any of what I just said, and he understands it better than I do, I'm sure. I come to bring you hope. It's a trap! Watch Star Wars, folks. Your lives will be enriched. It's a trap! You don't have to geek out on the manuscript evidence. You don't have to get into all this. 4th century AD, blah, 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 blah. Let's just take the argument and run with it. Let's just say that there are missing generations. Let's see where it takes us. Let's say we've got Enoch and we've got Methuselah there, right? So let's say, for sake of argument, the Enoch begot Larry, Larry begot Mo, and Mo begat Curly. Does this change anything? No. You know why? Because the Bible says that when Enoch was 65 years old, he had a son named Methuselah. So you can take Larry, Mo, Curly, Shemp, and whoever the other guy was, and you can stick them all in there if you want, but it doesn't change the fact that when Methuselah was born, Enoch, his papa, was 65 years old. So even if you were to assume missing heads, a hole in the genealogy, the chronology remains airtight, thanks to those wonderful things we call numbers. So what do we learn from this? We learn that the genealogical gap does not necessarily mean that there is a chronological gap. So what's our verdict on Genesis chapter 11? I say there are no gaps in the chronology or in the genealogy. And to put a pretty red bow on it, I'm going to wrap it all up, and I leave you with there are no demonstrable gaps in Genesis chapter 5. None. Any evidence of a gap in Genesis chapter 11 is tenuous at best, and even if there were gaps, the chronology in Genesis chapter 5 and Genesis chapter 11 are completely unaffected. So in this case, you can indeed treat these genealogies as a chronology. You can trace us back all the way back to Adam, which is approximately 6,000 years ago.